My name is Kristen Freer. Thanks, David, wherever you are. I am the SVP of Product Marketing at PerformMatch. I also operate as the GM of the Contact Center Monitoring platform, since that's the biggest product I've brought to market over the past 3 years. It's actually been quite an evolution over the past 3 years. I'd say the inception probably was LeadsCon 2011, when a whole slew of lead buyers were talking about contact center and looking to embrace the channel as a new way of generating leads. They were also talking about compliance concerns, since the content, the communication was the human element of the communication now, and it wasn't edited web pages. So we quickly responded, and we built a custom sort of search engine that made sense, a custom rule engine that would make sense for contact center. And now, tens of millions of calls later, we actually have two types of clients now. We have those clients who are looking to monitor their affiliates' call recordings, but also those looking to monitor their internal agents as well. So yes, we still monitor for compliance, of course, but we also monitor for agent performance. So today we're going to be with my esteemed co-presenters, which I'll introduce in 1 second. We're going to be talking about the inner workings of any contact center QA practice that employs automation specifically. And actually up here we have PerformMatch in kind of smaller font, because we're not just talking about the nuances of PerformMatch as an automation tool, but specifically automating QA in general. With that said, I have Aja Baxter, General Counsel from Education Dynamics, New Jersey-based Education Dynamics. And I have Matt King, VP of Customer Success from Boston-based Ramp. Ramp, quickly, I'll just give a background on Ramp. Ramp is all about unlocking the value of metadata in both video and audio. They, whether it's through search or through their transcription services, which is kind of how we partner in some ways with them, they also help monetize audio and video content, media content specifically for brands with media content. And as VP of Customer Success, Matt oversees project management and account management, both technical and client. Does that sound about right? Yep. Okay. And then Education Dynamics has actually been a client of ours. If we've been working with Ramp since 2011, Education Dynamics has also been a client of ours since then as well, since inception, beta, 3+ years ago. Yep. And Education Dynamics is a pioneer in the education marketing services and technology space. They generate quality enrollment leads for schools, and they've always been doing it in kind of a very compliant, committed, and transparent way. And as General Counsel, Aja oversees all legal and compliance for Education Dynamics. So I know not everybody here in this room probably is affected by contact center on a day-to-day basis, but your organization may or may not be buying call center leads, but your organization most likely has an internal call center. So somebody at your org is probably affected by what the learnings are going to be here today. So you could bring that to that person that lives and breathes contact center at your organization. So net, what that means is that no one's off the hook here to start playing Candy Crush on your phone or anything. Actually keep the blood flowing. Show of hands, when you are here thinking about contact center QA, who here would be thinking about contact center as it relates to monitoring affiliate call recordings, lead gen? Versus who here would be thinking about monitoring your internal agents? Okay, cool. So it's a good half and half. So I ask because the strategies we're going to talk here today are, some of them are universal to whether you're monitoring internal or third party, but some of them are unique, and I want to make sure that I remember to identify which is unique. So first, what makes contact center QA so different than other channels, other types of QA? The obvious is the human element. But we're not going to talk about what to monitor for humans or human speech versus edited text or documents, because my esteemed colleague Jaslene Lambda discussed that earlier in a workshop on rules. But we are going to talk about is two vital aspects of any contact center using automation in an efficient manner, which is call delivery and reviewing the results for optimization. So let's start with call delivery. Now, why does, you may ask, why does what seems like a very simple implementation step matter so much? Well, you'll soon realize that it kind of sets the stage for a QA, a contact center QA practice that employs automation. And it may sound like with all this attention to it that it's a lot of work and a lot of time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be if you are prepared and you're prepared to collaborate on the execution of call delivery, both internally and externally. And we're here to make sure you're not blindsided. So first, there's some business strategy questions that need to be answered before you start to execute on getting the calls to your automation partner. And these are all the same questions that have to be answered, whether it's for internal or for third party. The execution of, once you have the answers, the execution is unique to third party versus internal. But we'll start with what's universal. So there's 5 things that you have to ask before you sit down with the person, your IT person, or a third party that's going to execute the call delivery, and you find out from them what they can and cannot do. There's 5 things that you want to ask. So the first thing is call type. What calls are you going to want to have monitored through your automation partner? More specifically, what calls do you not want to have monitored? For internal, are we just doing sales? Are we doing sales and support? Do you want to include voicemails, or are you just doing connected calls? For third party transfer calls, do you want to do every part of the transfer or just certain parts? And the second part is rules. Of those call types, what ones are going to have specific rules because you're going to want to monitor different things for them? So obviously you're going to want different things for voicemails than human connected calls. The third is reporting. And there are certain call types that you may not want to segment for rules because they have the same rule types. Inbound and outbound often might have the same rule types, but you might want to report on them separately. So those will need to be segmented out in call delivery. Second to last is meta information, and what that means is what information about the call, besides the content of the conversation, do you need to take action on the call, whether that's to remediate to a vendor or to train an agent? You'll obviously need to know, and the agent ID, if it's internal, you'll need to know who the vendor is if it's third party. But some of the less obvious is date and timestamp of when the call was recorded. For recency, you need to know how long ago that conversation really happened when you talked to an agent about a trainable opportunity. And along the lines of recency, or actually establishing recency, is the last one, which is frequency. How often are you going to ask your IT department or your third party to send over call recordings to your automation partner? And internally, this is a pretty easy question. It's sitting down with your IT and just asking them about systems load and capacity. You know, how much volume can we push across our servers once a day, twice a day, once a week, whatever it is. But when you're talking about it for third party, it's not as straightforward because you have to collaborate with your third party teams, the IT people at your third party. So I'm going to have actually Aja speak for a couple of minutes about Education Dynamics experience with working with your many affiliates to get call recordings for monitoring, and specifically the kind of frequency question.
Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. Can everyone hear me? Sure. All right, great, thank you. Thanks, Kristen, for having me and having the Education Dynamics team here today. So to speak to your question, so we started using PerformLine on the automation side for QA around 2012, I think, when we sort of first started the relationship. And you know, at the time, I think there weren't a lot of other players who were asking for 100% of call recordings for various reasons. I think there wasn't quite the same pressure, perhaps at the time, from the client for us to collect 100% of the recordings that came in. And you know, quite frankly, our partners didn't have the sort of the tools in place to deliver it. I mean, it was difficult. You got to sort of track down calls, call IDs, associate the recording with the call ID, and extract it. So there was a lot of work there. But you know, we very early on established that it was important to us as an organization to make sure we had 100% of calls coming in, and I think there were a few reasons for that. One, obviously, you don't want there to be sort of a selective collection of calls, because you'll magically discover that all of the ones that you get are good ones, and then once you start peeling the onion a little bit, you start to find, okay, maybe there are some other things here that we need to be aware of. And so it's good to have the full range and have the opportunity to see the full range of recordings that are being done. Another thing I think sort of is important that comes out and comes out with the help of PerformLine is that you do start to see trends with some of the flags, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important when you spot a trend to kind of ask further questions as to what's going on here. Do we need to look a little harder at our script or something like that? So getting 100% of the calls, I think, is really important. The recency element that Kristen spoke to earlier, I think, is important as well. If you are not getting those calls within a day or two, anything could happen in the interim. So you could switch a particular partner out of your media plan, or there could be an agent that is no longer around, and then it's hard to track down what the sort of initial source of the issue was. So all that to say, it was very important for us to get 100% of the calls, and it continues to be the position that we take, and working with our partners to do that, right? So obviously, it's very easy sort of in legal to kind of sit in an ivory tower and say, we have to have 100% of calls and there should be no bad calls and that's it. But the way it really works, and I hope that the way that it works with our partner marketing team is that it's a conversation. It becomes more of a conversation of, okay, so we're seeing this, we're having these issues. Can we engage our partner a little bit more to identify what the source of the problem was? Because quite frankly, it's beneficial for them to get the feedback as well. So I think what has developed over time, and what hopefully has developed over time, is sort of this feedback loop between ourselves, PerformLine, as well as our partners, to kind of say, all right, we're getting all these calls, here's what we're hearing, here's how we can improve it, and I think it works to the benefit of everyone involved.
Yeah, I definitely witnessed that at Education Dynamics that your compliance legal group that you had is very much aligned with the media team, and that isn't always the case, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, like that's a conscious effort that was sort of, in place, quite frankly, before I got there, and hopefully we maintain that discussion and that open line of communication so that everybody ultimately benefits, and that the potential student ultimately benefits as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Aja. I know that sometimes it can be sort of a sensitive conversation, and with your media partners about how frequently they can get the calls and can they deliver it exactly how you want to. And I know we at PerformLine sometimes do the heavy lifting for some of our clients in that front. We'll be the ones in charge of helping them get those call recordings, and sometimes we're asked to sort of play bad cop while the partner kind of remains a good cop in that media partnership. So. For third party, if frequency, which is one of the steps of call delivery, if frequency is not so straightforward, because you have to collaborate with your third party on it, the rest of the steps of call delivery for third party is actually pretty straightforward, because it's out of your hands at this point. You've told your partner, I want you to deliver these types of calls, I want you to deliver them with this frequency, and you've come to terms with what that's going to be. Segment, meta, all those things I talked about. But once you've told them that, then it's just saying, where are you going to post the calls and what time of the day we're going to have to go pick them up. And then it's out of your hands. Now, internally, the rest of call delivery tactically involves a lot of collaboration itself. That process involves a lot of collaboration, both internally but externally. So our advice is to get your IT involved very, very early, and if only because they're actually going to have to be involving their recorder, the company that records your call recordings, or the companies if it's multiple recorders from multiple contact centers. Now, if this is your proprietary recorder, then it's easier. It's all internal, right? But if this is a medium-sized recorder company like Five9, they're flexible. If it's someone bigger like Verint, just by the sheer nature of the size of the company, it's going to take a lot of conversations. So get IT talking, get talking with IT early, and get IT talking with the recorder early. Now, I'm not going to get too technical because I can't imagine there's a ton, other than Varun, one of our senior engineers, that there's probably not a really technical people in the room. Actually, with a show of hands, let me just get the blood flowing again. How many people here in the room, besides Keith, our head of product, know the difference between an encrypted call and an encoded call, and besides Matt? Yeah, I assume not too many people. So just jot this stuff down for your IT people, because this is what they're going to need to really quickly, 4 things. This is what they're going to need to execute on with their recorder, the IT and the recorder collaboration. Quickly, it's going to be extraction, which is getting the calls out of where the recordings are stored at the recorder, and getting them to a third-party location for your automation partner to pick up the call recordings. Secondly is going to be that segmentation I talked about earlier, being able to segment out only the calls you want to have monitored, and segment them out for unique rule creation and for reporting reasons. The second to last thing is that meta I talked about. And actually the last thing is going to be a conversation they need to have with the recorder about audio quality. And I'm actually going to have Matt from RAMP, amongst other things, our transcription partner, talk about how audio quality affects the accuracy of automation and therefore your QA efficiency.
Thanks, Kristen. Excited to be here. And RAMP's been working with PerformLine since 2011. We do a lot of transcription for you guys. And we work on the quality issue every day. The transcription process has 2 parts, and the first part is the conversion of the audio signals. You know, you've probably seen a representation of audio where there's the up and down things, and we turn that into a stream of basically syllables that are spoken utterances. So they're just little chunks of what might be a word, and that's all the audio part does. And the way that's built is with 16-bit uncompressed WAV files. At 800 megahertz, which doesn't mean anything to you, but it's important because it expects that on the other side when we're comparing audio against the model. So no matter what comes in, we're always going to convert it to uncompressed WAV files and expect it at 800 megahertz. So that means for your best quality, you give us uncompressed WAV files. And then people say, oh, but we can't deal with this because it's too big. And we have an answer to that, and it's MPEG 32 megabits per second compression. Anything lower than that, so you get bigger files, but you don't get the quality. And once you start going down, it'll still work, but you'll get lower accuracy, and you'll have to do more effort to really dig into those calls. Another thing to note on compression, and this is probably one you've seen in real life on Facebook or social media, where you see somebody's screen captured an image so many times, it's been shared, and all the text is fuzzy and you can barely read it anymore. The same thing happens with audio if you re-record it as MP3 or re-encode it. And the quality goes down really quickly. Even after the first, if you just re-record it as MP3 once, your accuracy will start to drop. So you need to make sure that it's not getting re-recorded multiple times before getting handed off. The last part is whether or not you have 1 channel or 2 channels. With 2 channels, you can have the speaker and the caller and the agent being separated, and then do fine-grained targeting of each side. So there's a lot of advantages there. With a single channel, right now, it's hard to sort of separate those 2 out. We're actually working with PerformLine, another Boston-based company, to do a project that's going to be looking at the text to be able to intelligently separate out the 2 based on usage patterns. It's currently still in development, but it looks very promising, and it'll give you a lot of the advantages of the dual channel calls, but only having the single channel.
Cool. So. Thank you. And thank you for not going too much into megahertz world, because I know sometimes the passion with which we talk about things like compression rate is a little unnerving to everyone else in the audience. But so really quickly to summarize on call delivery, and then we'll move on to the second aspect of contact center QA involving automation. That's very vital. So this, for call delivery, make sure you know your call types, specifically the ones you don't want to monitor. Make sure you can work with your IT and your vendor to be able to segment out the call types you do want, get rid of the ones you don't want, segment them out also specifically for unique rule creation and reporting. Get all the meta information that you need to be able to take action on the call in front of you. Make sure you establish the frequency of delivery from the get-go and that you're okay with that. And to the extent that you can affect audio quality, try to get the best audio quality as you can. And to summarize some of what Matt just said, uncompressed or minimal compression. And the big message is send your automation partner samples along every step of the way so they can QA. I'm actually going to move on now to the second aspect of automating a QA practice that's just as unique as call delivery in terms of its relation to other QA channels, but probably more vital for the efficacy, which is optimizing results for giving feedback loop review to optimize results. So essentially, no call obviously can ever be the same. That's just impossible to do that with human conversation. So obviously, the human vernacular, human vocabulary is different agent to agent. It's different relative to the conversation you're having. It's different over time. But with that said, there seems to exist two pervasive misconceptions about the logistics and requirements of speech analytics. And one myth is that speech is a set it and forget it solution, which leads to the second myth that you don't have to review results for accuracy. Creating effective results requires iterative testing and ongoing enhancements. And over time, your results can increase. And we have clients that in month 6, or just 1 month, have 3 times as many actionable findings as they did in the first 90 days. And those are clients, though, that are working with us or with any automation partner in a team setting. They understand that there's collaboration needing. They understand the need for feedback. I'd like to think that we make, at PerformMatch, at PerformLine with PerformMatch, we make that feedback process pretty simple. I'll actually go into that a little bit later and what we do with it. But actually, I'm going to have Aja speak again for a couple minutes, but this time about education dynamics experience with an automation tool and giving feedback to it.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely evolved over time. I think whereas when we first started as a beta partner with PerformLine, there was a sort of static set of rules that were given. Did the advisor indicate that the call was being recorded, or did the advisor use a particular set of words that we asked PerformLine to look out for? And it was somewhat static for a while, and I think it was, there initially maybe kind of we set it and forget it type thing, but it definitely has evolved from there. So in a couple of very specific ways. One, obviously there have been new flags and new issues that we've asked PerformLine to monitor and look out for when a new, something you heard TCPA referenced earlier today, when new sort of legislation or things that could affect the call come out, we have to obviously update there. But also, if we introduce a new partner or new agent, and you start to hear the calls, then you start getting flags, and you want to understand, okay, why is this getting flagged? Does it make sense? Is it actually something we need to watch for? Is it a false positive? So I think we've increased sort of our feedback on a more regular basis with PerformLine to improve what they're monitoring, what they're flagging, and give us more actionable information. The other thing that I think that we did is, look, we've got a team of 3 people in Hoboken. It's small, we can't look at everything, but we've also expanded, one, to leverage our call center QA people who are based in Boca Raton to not only sort of monitor internal calls, but also to help us monitor our affiliate and our partner calls. And on top of that, we've just recently sort of expanded our relationship with PerformLine to help us with that monitoring as well. And all of that is sort of oriented toward getting more recent and actionable feedback for everybody involved in the loop, so that everything that we're getting is sort of much more recent, much more sort of task oriented, and I think we can. It helps us with remediation on the other side of that. So
yeah, absolutely. I think again the message is collaboration, and it really takes a village. And as I mentioned, I like to think that our system allows you to give that feedback in a pretty simple way. We, at least at PerformMatch, we allow you to remove or negate a finding after you've reviewed it, whether you want to do that because of context, or whether because your threshold has changed, your tolerance threshold has changed, or whether it was an early false positive, with something that we call manual override. With a click of a box, you can remove and rescore, which is cool, but what's even cooler is that you can give feedback to decrease the chance that you'll see that flag again a second time and have to override it a second time. I also like to think that we make it easy for the person doing the optimization at PerformLine within our system. And I'll just give you a couple of quick feedback examples. So a mortgage company keeps overriding a band term that is low rate. And the feedback that we get from that is that low rate is fine by itself, but it just can't be proceeded with any iterations of all time. So we need to now narrow that rule set. We started off broad, like we did with Education Dynamics when we started off, and that's the recommendation, to cast a wide net and get data and then analyze and optimize from there. This would be an indication of how we use that feedback to do that. The opposite is actually sometimes we have to broaden the rules with required language. That's often the case. You give us your mini Miranda disclaimer that says this call has to be recorded and monitored for quality assurance reasons. We get feedback from you that you keep overriding that required flag, and you're saying this person is saying this, they're just not saying recorded and monitored, and I'm okay with that. And so now we have alternative terms that we put in that says you could say recorded and or monitored, and then it won't get flagged. Conditional logic we layer on. An educator says anytime they mention financial aid or any version of financial aid, they have to say you may qualify. And we can do proximity on top of that, which says they have to say those other words within 30 seconds before, 30 seconds after. And sometimes we can layer on things like time sensitivity with the recorded rule, for example. You have to say it within the first 60 seconds, or else it won't be a pass. Now, those are some examples of tactics that we take for optimization that are reactive to your feedback. But there's obviously a lot of things that we can do proactively to optimize and customize the rules and results for our clients. And I'm actually going to have Matt speak one more time about some of those proactive optimizations that we've invested in to great success.
Sure. So where we left off is we'd taken these waves, we turned them into a little stream of utterances, and now we don't have audio anymore, it's just text. Here's a stream of utterances. And so the next thing we have to do is compare it against what we call our language model, which is very specific to the spoken language, being English or whatever language you want, and then the domain, so in this case, call center domain. And when that's built, it comes up with a finite dictionary of words that it knows about. And it also records sort of a frequency of what it expects to find. This word occurs after this word occurs after this word. And it uses that to make its guesses about what someone's actually saying. So there's a couple of follow-ons from that. One is that if the word that is being spoken wasn't part of that training set, it will never come out of the transcription. You also don't get spelling errors, but that's not quite as helpful. But so you'll never get novel words. So these are called out of vocabulary words. You can also have problems when you have changes in language or maybe website names that use common words in uncommon format, uncommon orders. And there you'll get misrecognitions because of the expected frequency is different than what it's actually finding. So we have a couple ways to help with this. One way is what we call full data modeling, which is adding more training data to the set and rebuilding the model. This is a fairly heavy weight, both in time and expense, and it doesn't scale to having every customer having 10 different models. It just won't work for a number of reasons. We did do this with PerformLine when the TCPA regulations came out. We expanded the training set to handle or to know about those phrases, and we got like a 60% increase in keyword accuracy just from that technique. The other thing, which I think is very common, is after the fact, if say there's a company called Solera. And when you put that through the ramp engine, it'll come out sometimes as Solaris, the operating system, or sometimes Solar, or 3 or 4 other variations, but it'll never come up as Solera because it just wasn't trained on that. So sometimes you'll put synonyms in, and you'll say, if I find any of these words, that's okay. But the problem is you need to know what all those words are ahead of time, and sometimes you don't know that. So what we've built is sort of a supercharged version of this that lives within the transcription engine. So you give it your list of keywords and phrases. We encode those in the same language that the recognizer uses, and then at runtime it looks at all of the possible guesses, and if it finds the words you're looking for, it will promote them up to being the best guess, or the guess if in the case of a novel word that doesn't exist. We use that for website names for you guys with almost 100% increase in keyword accuracy. It's very scalable. It's quick to implement. You can have multiple, you can have as many different flavors of that as you want. So you can tailor it specifically to a particular content source or slice of a content source.
Yeah, that was a recent one that we did. That was awesome success. I guess the message there is that feedback is king, but there are always ways that we're going to use proactive optimization to customize the results for our clients. And just to close, I know that some of you may struggle with why you should care about some of the vernacular used today, like compression rates and conditional logic. But hopefully the overarching message, which is prepare to collaborate when it comes to using automation for contact center QA, will resonate and encourage you to invest the time and thought process it will take to build an effective QA practice employing automation. Actually, after the break, which I think happens right after this, in the breakout session that will be right here, there's going to be 2 case studies from 2 of our contact center clients that'll prove that if you do adhere to some of these things we talked about today, it'll actually work. But until then, is there any questions on some of this not so obvious stuff that hopefully we can answer for you? Anyway. If not, I know we threw a lot of information at you in a short period of time. I hope you jotted down lots of notes for your IT people. Okay. For optimization of rules? Oh, for onboarding. So for the first side of contact center, that is called delivery. If you've gone to a session like this and you're really prepared, then it can be 30 days. And I'm not just jesting there, because if you answer those strategy questions out of the gate and you know for sure what calls you don't want monitored and how to segment them for the 2 things you need to segment them for, unique rule creation and reporting, that's like 70% of the process is just answering those questions so that you don't go running to IT and say, these are the calls that I want to send. Oh, I forgot to tell you, you have to separate out inbound and outbound. And then you have to go back. And if that means going back to the recorder, and that's Verint, then that's a lot of conversations you're going to have. So if you can be kind of prepared, knowing you have to answer those questions before you even talk to IT or a third party, then that will shorten your implementation time significantly. And I don't know if this was your also question, but in terms of ramping up to what Aja was speaking about in terms of QA, the commitment to feedback and the rule optimization you can do because of that. Like I said, we have clients that see 6 times, or 3 times I think it was, as many actionable findings in month 6 than they did in the first 90 days. So I would say it takes 90 days if you're committed to feedback. It takes you 90 days to get to a point where you're comfortable. It's an ongoing process, the review of the results, as Aja was saying. If you introduce new rules, or TCPA comes around, you introduce new rules, or you introduce new agents. If it's internal, you introduce new vendors. There's always going to be kind of a spike, and you have to review those results. But if you're really committed, the first 90 days, you'll see significant rise in actionable findings after the first 90 days. Hi.
Results come back only as fail, or can they be reported as what words we missing? So in other words, if you wanted to say monitored and recorded,
Yep.
if you wanted to say monitored and recorded, and there's a fail, the fail is because they missed the word recorded.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't. It doesn't tell you. For example, if you give you an example, if you it won't tell you. I've seen other intelligence systems where they sort of tell you that we have a 70% confidence that they didn't say this, and that is the recorded disclaimer. We'll tell you they didn't say. If you have two things that they could say, recorded and or monitored, you have these alternative terms. They didn't say recorded, but they did say monitored. So it'll tell you. So you'll be able to make a decision for moving forward. I'm okay with keeping that as an alternative term. Recorded is enough for the disclaimer, and you know for sure what calls you don't want monitored and how to segment them for the 2 things you need to segment them for: unique rule creation and reporting. That's like 70% of the process is just answering those questions so that you don't go running to IT and say, these are the calls that I want to send. Oh, I forgot to tell you, you have to separate out inbound and outbound. And then you have to go back. And if that means going back to the recorder, and that's Verint, then that's a lot of conversations you're going to have. So if you can be kind of prepared, knowing you have to answer those questions before you even talk to IT or a third party, then that will shorten your implementation time significantly. And I don't know if this was your also question, but in terms of ramping up to what Aja was speaking about in terms of QA, the commitment to feedback and the rule optimization you can do because of that. Like I said, we have clients that see 6 times, or 3 times I think it was, as many actionable findings in month 6 than they did in the first 90 days. So I would say it takes 90 days if you're committed to feedback. It takes you 90 days to get to a point where you're comfortable. It's an ongoing process. Any other questions? Cool. If not, I'll let you guys go to break early. But thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to these guys for being here today. Sorry. Really appreciate it.